yeah, where this came from was essentially we're running a career series podcast where we spoke at different stages of one's career through, I guess, getting into sport, how to last a long time in sport and transitioning out, as well as chatting to some great female clinicians in around some challenges they face. And part of that, we offered a free CPD planner, so to speak, in a self-assessment form. And that's more to just get that self-analysis going. And some of that information we used was within that was from some work we found from your stuff, Dan, around rating oneself in areas of communication, active learning, and what have you, and we'll chat through that. So, hence
Mm.
reason going after to get you on board to add clarity to that and to give some further information around what we're about, as well as then obviously Simon, who I'll get you guys to introduce yourself briefly and shortly. Obviously, Simon's worked in Australia at a top level sport, moved to the UK, worked at Crystal Palace, top level sport, and now US. And we know the logistics around transferring into different countries, to registration and find a place and where to gain some good CPD and where to gain experience. So we'll tap into some knowledge there. So yeah, that's our bit of where the whole concept come from. So we'll keep things to an hour, and maybe Dan, why don't you just fill us in a little bit on yourself now and your background and what you're doing with collaborative sports.
Yeah, thanks for having me, everyone. I really appreciate you tuning in and listening to what we've got to say, and hopefully it'll add some value to your thought processes. But my background predominantly is strength and conditioning. That was my discipline, so to speak. That's where I trained, and formed largely the last 20 years of my career, and formerly mostly the first 15 years of that was in elite sport, from the Institute of Sport through to professional rugby, England Sevens, and then that took me to the States as well, and to working in Major League Baseball. But yeah, my discipline was strength and conditioning, and I got into high performance leadership then as well as part of my director role at Houston Astros. So I had a team of 13 coaches in one baseball team, which was quite cool to operate over. But that meant that I started leaning in towards more like thinking about other people more than myself and my careers, and how to shape their journeys, and how to help them basically achieve what I wanted them to achieve as their lead practitioner without telling and dictating. I didn't want to run a dictatorship as a department. So that really got me really interested in helping them learn, because and the culture of being in America compared to the UK, I saw a different way of learning, which we can probably get into later. Um, so anyway, that then took me down the route of working or developing collaborate sports, which was developed around COVID because everybody jumped on webinars, but they were relatively transactional. It was listen to us experts speak about this pinnacle topic. And I was like, "Ah, that's not how I learned. Like I learned through interaction and what we'll probably refer to later as active learning and immersive environments." And so I was like, I want to bring a bit of that to practitioners. It's vulnerable. It's takes a certain growth mindset to engage with, but the reward is huge. And so that's how I exclusively run a lot of the development work I do now, whether it's through in-person work, it's all immersive, or whether it's online, it's all immersive, or even if it's the podcast I run, I'm actually stopping the guest quite frequently to immerse and ask them a question that I think the listener is probably asking in their car as they're listening on the way to work. And so I'm just trying to change the dynamic of people who, or for people who are learning through our platform, not to replace learning, because there's lots of different ways to learn, but just add that more MDT, immersive discussion, reflection type of learning. So that's where I'm at now, doing what I'm doing in mentorship and helping coaches and practitioners develop.
Yeah, love that. Beautiful. And I'm sure, yeah, looking forward to tapping into a little bit more of that. And Simon, fill us in a little bit. Obviously, yeah, you're in the States now, but you just moved across from where you guys won a trophy with Crystal Palace. And yeah, we'll tap into your experiences as we go.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think as you alluded to, I'm an Australian physiotherapist initially and worked in a couple of sporting organisations in Australia. And then it was mostly my wife, to be honest, that thought that we'd enjoy moving overseas and trying something different. So we moved to the UK, and once again was really fortunate to find a footing there and make some good connections, meet new people, work with some other sporting organisations, mostly in football or soccer, as you'd imagine, with that the popularity of that over there. And then, once again, my wife got a very exciting job opportunity in the US, and we thought, let's try that out as well. And I'm probably in the thick of it. This is a good time for this podcast. I'm looking forward to, or this kind of webinar, looking forward to learning a few bits from Dan myself, because I'm starting from scratch again. I've been in the US for 6 to 8 months. I've just started with a kind of joint clinical and sports role with professional rugby over here, which not many people know exists, but it does, Major League Rugby. So with the Chicago Hounds and with a clinic here as well. So yeah, I think I suppose, journey in sports physio in different countries has been a little unique from other Australian physios I know who've worked in sport in the US or sport in the UK, and that a lot of those physios moved because they got an opportunity in sport, whereas mine's been so far the opposite, where I've moved for personal reasons and then had to, I suppose, figure out how to meet new people or find new opportunities and experiences. So yeah, it's been fun, but it's been a steep learning curve, and hopefully some of the experiences I've had are helpful to others. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure. Beautiful. All right. Well, we'll tap into that as we go, team. So let's crack in. As I said, we'll take some questions throughout in that QR code that we had up at the start. But to kick things off, I guess, Dan, I'll throw this one to you. We talk around career planning. That's sort of where we titled it. Around, what's that actually mean for us? And yeah, how important is it?
Yeah, I think it's really important. I mean, I've just told you offline or before the session that I've just got off a group mentorship call with a program I run called Future Ready for graduates and early stage practitioners, and we talked about career thinking traps. And one of the things shared by one of the early stage practitioners, she's a PhD physiologist, is, well, before you challenged me, I just assumed where I wanted to go will kind of fall into place. And I'm like, no, that's a huge thinking trap, and it does happen for some people, but that's what you perceive happens. What has happened is that those people have done some really significant things to create opportunities for themselves. They've thought about their next steps. So career planning for me is taking the initiative to think a few steps down the line in a methodical way. And the analogy I use is career periodization rather than career planning, which is, you wouldn't expect your athlete to go from now to peak condition in one step. There is macro cycles to think about, micro cycles. There's certain skills they need to develop first that they can then utilize at the Olympics, in 4 years' time. It's the same for your career. What do I need to do now to get to where I want to be? And I guess I always try to draw on real experiences. So I'm going to anchor into Simon's world as best I can. He's taken this step into the US. Well, there's a disconnect between physiotherapy and physical therapy. In his world of working in Australia and the UK, physiotherapy aligns. In the US, it does not in the same way. In different states, you need different licenses to do different things. So you might be trained in acupuncture in one state, but it doesn't carry over into another state. That all needs careful planning and consideration. It can't just be, I need to jump here and do this job and be insured. So that's something to consider. There's a guy another Australian great physio, works in the UFC, and he's looking at, what am I thinking about in my 10-year career plan about converting my physiotherapy degree or skills into physical therapy competencies as well, and getting them certificated or authenticated through the system. So that's planning. That's thinking about the next step of where you want to be, rather than what I refer to as a hopeful strategy. It's a methodical, strategic approach to your career.
Yeah. Is that Tim Roberts, I'm guessing? He's
Yeah,
the
great guy.
man who
Yeah,
plans
yeah,
ahead.
yeah.
Now, I guess throwing this one back at you. Okay, so I am here. I've got a rough idea of what I want to do. I sort of want to go work towards a professional sport or run my own clinic. Where do I start right now? How do I sort of evaluate where I'm at? Find out, like, what am I doing in the short term? Where does this process start for us?
Nice. Skills audits, basically. It's it's a needs analysis. Like, again, we're going to use our world of performance sport, I guess, or working with people with injuries or trying to get to physical goals. Is going, what's the gap? Where do I need to get to, and what are the limiting factors? So, if I am a sports scientist that wants to work in elite sport. And I recognize that the best sports scientists now that are 5 years ahead of me are already really good at coding and code-based solutions. Well, that's going to become common practice in the next 5 to 10 years. So I need to make that an urgent skill set potentially for me now, right? And so it's about going through a skills audit. What have I got as highly competent currently? And so what can I grade out as pretty elite or pretty reliable and pretty consistent as a skill? And what do I need to develop? The next question is whether there's an urgent need for that lacking competency or not. And I always talk about speed and agility for S&C coaches. Everybody loves to do speed agility, CPD courses and training, and that's the plethora of Instagram feed that they get thrown and fed. But what if that's a 10-minute or 15-minute exposure that you get access to a week with your athletes? There's 2 hours of gym work. Who's going through program design and really ensuring that their competency around outcome-led programming and adaptation-led programming is up where it needs to be to get that role that is called a strength and power coach in a rugby team, right? That's what a skills audit is recognizing where the gap is and the necessity for where I want to go. And if speed is not the necessity and you're already pretty good at it, don't put more energy into that if you're already pretty competent at it and it's not a high necessity for the next role that is strength and power orientated. So yeah, does that answer that for you?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, the speed element is a good one. Looking at if it is it urgent or it's not. It's one thing to analyze, I guess, a skill set you need, but how important
Mm.
and urgent is that? I'll throw this one to you, Simon. Can you think of obviously you were working with the Boomers in Australia and Sydney Kings, which is our top level basketball. In your earlier phase career, do you remember doing a bit of a needs analysis on yourself, and what did you find that you and areas for you to really need to progress and hone?
Yeah, definitely. I think that um, a lot of that has come. Sometimes it's come the other way, and I think that's like one piece of advice as well. Is I've gone into roles that I know that um, I might not have all of the skills necessary for, but I feel well enough supported, and I feel like I'm surrounded by mentors that are strong enough in those areas to learn from those. So I think my sports physio learning curve has been pretty steep because I have gone to a few different cultures and environments in sports. I started in semi-professional AFL, which is a sport that I grew up playing and understood. I then went to professional basketball, which once again was a sport that I grew up playing and understood. So the leap from semi-professional to professional was a steep learning curve, but at least I understood the sport. But then to go to the UK where soccer or football was a sport that I'd had no experience in, but was essentially, I mean, aside from rugby that Dan mentioned, is the only sport anyone cares about. So if you're going to go over there and work in sport, it's the opportunity you're going to get. And I think that probably drove my thinking towards if I'm going to, try and be employable in different environments and try and be flexible with, like I said, with my my wife and relationship and not just be honed in on I only want to work in one sport so we can only move to countries where they play that sport, is trying to think a bit more broadly into, okay, so I can't just hang my hat on being a good basketball physio or being a good AFL physio. It's what kind of principles or guidelines are transferable across sports and across, I guess, cultures and environments, and how can I get really good at those and feel like I'm switched on enough with those that I can have a conversation with any practitioner from any sport and kind of end up speaking the same language. And then I think the more specific or sport specific skills and understanding I've generally tried to pick up or learn once I'm there and been, I suppose, vulnerable enough to use a word that Dan brought up earlier, to lead with that and tell people like these are things I think I do really well, and these are some things that I know is a gap, but I feel comfortable and confident that I can develop that quickly. So
Are you
yeah, I've
comfortable to
definitely
share?
experienced it.
Are you comfortable to share a couple of things that you think still now are the areas you openly need to address and that you're working on in a physio standpoint?
Yeah, I think that especially like going from professional basketball to football or soccer, was understanding, I guess, a bit more about periodization, about on pitch metrics and running loads and things like that. Like when we were in basketball, and I mean, this is probably a trend. If you want to talk about things that I'm still kind of working on and trying to understand, it probably is that monitoring. And I mean, Dan even mentioned before with coding and things like that. That's, you know, miles away from me, but trying to at least have an understanding of those kind of monitoring metrics as they get a bit more advanced. And, you know, when I was working in professional basketball, we had a GPS unit indoors that all it could determine was an arbitrary unit of load, because it couldn't really pick up from the satellites and things like that. So you basically just periodized load. You couldn't pick up accelerations, decelerations, change direction. You couldn't pick up jumping, things like that. So you had one number to basically track and monitor. Then I went to obviously football, and there's infinite numbers, you know, high speed running. You've got zone 5, zone 6. It means a different thing to every team and every, you know, SSC coach or performance practitioner, and understanding then with the amount of information we're getting, and, you know, talking to practitioners over here in the NBA with 3D, you know, they've got the 360-degree cameras picking up even more detail than that, is understanding how to wade through all of that information and figure out what's relevant and what's not. And that's definitely a skill set that every job I've taken so far through my career has been pushed more, and I know there's plenty more pushing to go. So yeah, that's probably a pretty good example, and something that I'll stick my hand up and say I'll never be the expert at a team at that, but I need to be able to understand it.
Yeah, nice, mate. Well, thanks for sharing that one with us. Now, we will sort of work, I guess, through a process of trying to break down some of the needs analysis and avenues I sort of spoke about in our CPD planner, Dan. But I guess for clinicians, high performance or physiotherapy, and just trying to gain some clarity about their career vision, there's obviously so many possibilities out there. How do we go about doing that?
Well, I guess the first thing is, well, it's probably not in the direction that people think I might say, right? The first thing that people need to do is take a look personally, not professionally, because, and it's great to see that Simon is, I wouldn't say the word yielded, right? But you've moved to the country of America because I think you said your wife's got the opportunity there, and you've aligned your route to hers. A partnership, a relationship, a marriage is going to bring two dynamics to your career. Like you have to, you know, maybe prioritize one or the other in certain situations, especially in sport, right? And so the first thing I ask people to do is think about what their needs and wants are, is to be really clear about personally, in my own life, what do I want to do and how do I align a career to that, not the other way around. Because if you're chasing a job that is working in soccer 7 days a week and you want to holiday to Europe every weekend, right, it's not going to align. Your personal needs and wants are not going to be fulfilled by the job. And it is possible if you have that frank conversation with yourself first. So a career vision, people jump to a badge or an aspiration or a target that is quite externally driven and they forget about themselves. I think that's a really important factor that I just by not getting some of the jobs that maybe I wanted early in my career enabled me to go, wow, I actually quite like going cycling for 4 hours in the middle of the week on a Wednesday when I've got a half day, and still having Saturday, Sunday off, you know, like type thing when I worked in academia. So what do you want to do as a person, and what do you want your job to help you do personally? Because let's be honest, a career has a purpose. It's to help you live the life you want to live. And I think that's the elephant in the room sometimes. And I'm not afraid to sort of bring that up, but you can do both. If you're really honest about what you don't want to do, then that helps you understand where to use your skills. And that's the bit that people forget, is that skills are highly transferable, right? Simon has gone to the States to, I guess, follow his wife's career opportunity. Well, Simon's got skills in working with human beings, helping them achieve their goals, He's got clinical skills. He's got coaching skills. He's got MDT skills. He's got performance problem solving skills. There's so many different directions that those skills can be used in that aren't clinic and aren't sport orientated. There's community benefit, there's high school programs, college systems, there's even businesses that might need high performance thinking that he can add value to. Um, and so for me, a career vision is about knowing what you want to do, also what you don't want to do, and what skills you have and where they can be useful. Um, so yeah, I don't know that doesn't give a direct answer, but hopefully it gives people a vision of different directions to look at with their career as well.
No, perfect. I
Can
think
I ask
definitely,
something off the
Simon.
back of that, Dan?
Yeah.
How, where do you see, and this is something once again that I'm obviously kind of going through in the last little while with different opportunities and things like that,
Yeah.
but do you see much wiggle room or do you encourage much wiggle room for those, I guess, priorities and maybe personal versus professional priorities to kind of ebb and flow over time, like
Oh
having
yeah.
periods of time where you are willing
Yeah.
to sacrifice a bit more
Yes.
of this side to get a bit more of this side and vice versa? Is that
Yeah.
something you encourage?
Yeah. I think it naturally will happen if you're open to being patient, right? So early in our career, there's no need to be patient because the only person we need to prioritize is ourselves, right? At that point, even if we have a partner, a girlfriend, there's plenty of people that have chosen a career over a relationship earlier on in their lives, and that's absolutely fine. And those decisions need to be made, and they're very personal in nature. But there'll be times in your life where you need to yield to personal and let the career align to that. And there'll be times where you need to yield to a career and let the personal side adapt to that. Um, so yes, it does ebb and flow. Um, I would encourage anybody to always explore numerous opportunities because you can always say no. People fear that if I get a job offer, I have to say yes. And it's like because I've been offered it. It's like no, you've got if it doesn't align to your personal needs and wants, which that's the decision people have problems with is when they haven't thought about the impact of this role. And so it's okay to say, well, actually, for the next 2 to 3 years, I'm just going to go explore in the States because we need this amount of money to live the way we want to live. That's catered up for in this way. So I have all manner of opportunities available to me as Simon, a physio. And it may be that you end up coaching little league basketball, right, out in the States because it aligns to what you enjoy, which is helping people. It is testing you and developing some other skills you've never had, never maybe tried before with youth athletes. It's helping you understand about youth growth and maturation injuries that you've never really had exposure to before. There's so many ways we can use our skills, but it's being really aware of what are the priorities right now in my career or my life or our careers as a partnership and our lives as a couple.
Yeah, beautiful. Thanks, team. I think the analysis of looking at the person and your own individual goals is some great advice. I think for any younger clinician out there trying to pave their way. So I guess you've sort of covered on probably two things. A question I was going to ask is just before we move on is any mistakes we might commonly make when thinking about career planning and career trajectory. And you've sort of touched on one maybe not looking at self and two, maybe thinking it might happen passively. Is there anything else that you think is a common sort of mistake you see when people are sort of looking at this area?
Yeah. Yeah, I've got a slide from the presentation earlier. I think there's a list here. Prestige chasing are the career traps. So chasing a badge that then means that you're chasing one thing and that can create blind spots because you're so obsessed
Mm.
on that job or that type of job. And therefore you forget to develop other skills. Over relying on formal qualifications. So we know people who are certificate hunters and they go bang, 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 and they've got this plethora of options available and they've attended all these courses, but not got the practical experience to embed them. So over relying on one or the other, and other people who rely on practical experience and think that that's enough when actually me going to the States as an S&C coach, I needed NSCA. ASCA and UKCA stood for nothing there. It didn't matter. For the MLB, I needed to achieve that within 6 months. So I had to go and study that distracted me from the job to tick a box, but it was a necessity. And many people on that side of the coin will oppose it. Aska's different. Like you guys need those credentials in Australia to call yourself an S&C coach. In the UK, it's not like that's why people are trying to dodge it. So, and those things stand out for you when you're recruiting. So not falling into that trap. What else have I got here? Um, Time management and prioritization, right? Again, it's all really relevant timing. This tomorrow I got a LinkedIn post about is does in high performance sport we focus on the development of the athlete day in day out, or the patient day in day out, and therefore is this an anti-performance model for our own development because we're always affording time towards other people and not our own development. And that's another trap. And I've been guilty of that, is that I get 5 years down the line, I'm like, I still didn't develop that skill that I wanted to. And that opportunity's gone. I'll never be that data skills guy now. I'll never be able to create those cool visualizations. So that's another one. What else have I got here? Networking, like believing it's the who you know that gets you places. It's not, it's who you know and who knows what you're capable of. That's the distinct difference, right? Us three here don't really know each other that well, but just having a quick look at Simon's LinkedIn because he looked at mine, he worked at Complete Physio in London, which means he was probably hired by Chris Myers.
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah. And Chris is a good
Yeah.
friend from the industry, from the institute that I worked for. So he could vouch for Simon. That he knows what Simon's capable of, right? That's really important in your career, but not just name dropping or networking without a purpose. That's really critical. Um, and then lack of willingness to step outside a comfort zone, right? So trying to stretch yourself to skills that you think you might not need, or you only try and develop once you need them. And a critical one here is soft skills and communication and leadership, for a role of leadership demand that will probably need conflict management and like um, alignment of people to do what you need them to do, which is quite a skill. But people get promoted based on potential, not on their skill set a lot of the time into their first leadership role. They haven't got leadership capabilities. They're just promoted on potential. Um, so people who develop those skills ahead of time are a step ahead. People who are learning on the fly tend to sometimes slip up. So yeah, there's a list for you. I've got.
Yeah, nice. Well, I think as a workshop between us, we're going to break down some elements. But before, I mean, you touched on we're going to talk to active learning. You know, touched on it earlier at the start, and you mentioned there within that someone who might chase courses and not the practical element, and then vice versa. And I guess, yep, we are a CPD organization that encourages people to sort of learn. And one of our challenges is, one, it's about providing good content for people to feel that they can learn and develop, but also we know how busy people are and creating a sort of system and structure that fits with individual people to
Yeah.
then be able to be applying is an ongoing challenge. So I guess, firstly, what is active learning? How is it different to just attending courses and CPD? And yeah, what sort of some examples you can give us?
Yeah, so active learning for me just means that there's a clear immersive component within the learning. You're immersing yourself to understand in a what we call a deep learning, not surface learning component. And deep learning has been studied versus surface learning. And so surface learning tends to be more rote in nature. And like obviously with no disrespect, because I said everybody needs every type of learning, right? And so critical information shared in courses through your platform will be absolutely fundamental underpinning knowledge. The active learning is how do I turn that um, knowledge into experiential knowledge and application. Now, that can happen in numerous different ways. It can happen because the person who's learning just has this innate desire, motivation, or ability to go, I'm going to try that tomorrow, right? I'm going to try this screening tool that Simon has shared with me on this platform, and I'm going to go and try it with my athlete or my peer. We're going to do a bit of 15 minutes of just, effing around and finding out, as I call it. It's a really cool place to explore the underpinning knowledge. So that requires an intrinsic motivation a lot of the time, right? That can't be driven by you guys on the course. It's independent. Um, Another situation is that individuals are already say an MDT team, right? So if I was to say and deploy my staff to go through module one of a course that you guys have done, for me to bring them back and discuss that relevance to them and where it would be applicable in the environment, where it might work, what could be the pros and cons, what might be some of the constraints within us applying some of those tools or force platform metrics, etc. That creates an immersive experience. The whole thing here is the reflective component that is really critical. And that's why assignments in academia are quite active versus exam-based multiple choice, because it's encouraging you to think around the application and the implication of the insight that you're gleaning. Is that
Yeah.
hopefully that's clear.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Mate, Simon, can you give me an example, I guess, how you as a physio, as a clinician would actively learn? Like, how do you implement? I know you've been to many a course and online, the masterclass, etc. How do you implement that into your practice?
Yeah, I mean, thankfully, I think it aligns with a bit of what Dan was saying, who's obviously looked quite deeply into it, in that, the base level is, attending courses of interest, or reading content of interest, or listening to podcasts of interest and things like that, and kind of knowing where that information is. But if you're just kind of passively listening, then um, it's gone again pretty quick. But I guess just keeping an eye on where that stuff is, because I feel like I learn so much better when I am applying it. So it's about knowing where I can find that sort of information, and then accessing it in situations where I can apply it right away. So if I'm dealing with, if I'm rehabbing an athlete with a specific injury, then doing that deep dive and applying that to them, or not necessarily, not going trial and error on them, but applying that learning, or discussing, as you mentioned as well, Dan, going into a bit of a deep dive, coming out with often more questions than answers, and then taking them to the MDT at the club that I'm at, or mentors that I have separately, or people that I respect, and talking through it with them. And I find that's really helpful. Having that base level of learning where I'm, constantly finding things that are interesting and keeping an eye on. And obviously, that's what sports map is so good for. And then having those things separated into body parts and things like that, it's so easy to then go back and know, if I'm in 6 months' time, when I've kind of forgotten what I've learned just now, I go straight back to it as soon as I'm in a situation where I know it's going to be useful. And then once I've had an opportunity to do that and discuss it with, like I said, people I respect, and work our way through some of these questions together, then I find it's pretty much stuck with me from there. And then I know that information is gonna be with me. So
Yeah.
yeah, glad to hear Dan back that up.
No, I like the term active learning for sure. Yeah, go for it.
I was just going to say, just to add to that, it's really important that you understand yourself as a learner. There's um there's different ways to learn as well. And also, like, what is your environment? Luckily, if we're looking at clinicians and sports scientists and strength conditioning coaches, etc., and rehab, there's a human component to that, right? Naturally, most people will probably benefit from learning immersively, actively, on top of the rote side of information being given to them. But some people in different professions might learn better by just implicitly learning facts and figures and processes, right? And that's okay as well. So this, like, an active learning environment, I think, is really rich for decision making and ecologically dynamic environments, because otherwise you're not exploring scenarios and contexts and challenges. And the what if question, what if we were faced with this athlete with this background and we were taking this approach with them, what would we do? That's a really active component, because, like, our worlds are very ecologically dynamic. So that's why active learning is really rich for us as practitioners around CPD and development.
Yep. I love it. Now, part of within our CBD planner, what we sort of borrowed from you guys, which you have out there, is a bit of a scale to rate yourself from 1 to 10. I'm just going to read out these 6 or 7 points, and then some follow-up questions. So if you're a clinician out there, you can almost picture, you can rate yourself on clarity of the vision of your career, excitement and motivation about your career, commitment to your professional development, consistently applying what you learn, practical intelligence, intellectual intelligence, network and relationship building, and communication skills. So you'd rate yourself out of 10 on each one of those. And I mean, I did have a question to help. Can you define for us the difference between practical and intellectual intelligence?
This one's for me, right?
Yep, that's for you.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. So for me, I think I would call this practical. I would call technical skills. And then as you've described it here, intellectual intelligence, I guess would probably be more around the soft skill side of things or the EQ, the emotional intelligence. So, I mean, just straight off the bat here, we've got an example of interpretation as well, because like how you interpret the word intellectual for one person could be very different to the other. And so, again, when you audit your skills, to do it with somebody and understand the context of it is really important as well, because competencies can be assumed. So I think that's really important. But yeah, that's the way I would interpret that to start with.
Yep. And communication skills to both of you. I've got a question here. I sort of struggle with relaying some of the deeper levels of the communication within a multidisciplinary team and really confident with their clinical skills. But how do I go about improving communication skills? Like, how do you guys work on it? It's almost something that we often just think, oh, I communicate, which just happens organically and natural. But if you can think of those who are really, really good communicators, there's a real point of difference there. They have a certain skill set, the way they transverse knowledge. And how do I improve that? I'll start with you, Dan, and then Simon will throw it to you on this.
Yeah, I mean, I've spent the last 5 years trying to encourage practitioners to, a little bit of a plug, but come on our mentorship around soft skills. And it's one, hands down, if you think about all your courses on your platform, right, there'll be ones that maybe sell better than others or people seek more than others, right? Soft skills and optimizing your soft skills is something that people don't seek because they don't believe they need to develop it because we talk every day. You absolutely fundamentally do because just working with other people to raise your awareness of the types of words you use at certain points of a sentence can have real impact on you improving your communication. For example, we'll just use interviews because everybody can relate to that, right? And I'll also give another example between a physio and potential head coach. If you go to an interview and you're asked, what would you do to manage a tendinopathy of an athlete that is relatively chronic, but the coach needs them to play? Okay, so they can present with some function, but it's with pain. What would you do? If your first words out of your mouth are, well, I guess I would, or I'd kind of do this, or I'd sort of do that, it's not convincing. So you've already created a really big area of doubt, even if your answer is brilliant from that point, because it's the first couple of words that come out of your mouth. And proximity of words used in relation to question asked has a big bearing on what's remembered, right? Both the first thing you said and the very last thing you said. So if you say that and then you wrap up with, so yeah, that's kind of what I do. Well, you've just said it twice at both ends of the both proximity that people are actively listening to you most. So that's the level of detail I go into with practitioners around communication. The next one is understanding preferences. So I'm quite direct, I'm quite to the point, I'm not very empathically driven. And so for me to stick to facts is quite easy, and I don't tend to use words like I just feel or my instinct tells me very much. But in the physio world, where a lot of it is based on experience and instinct as well as objective data, a head coach is probably going to be a bit more like me as a preferential character. Like their preferences is around facts and logic and planning, right? Well, for a physio to go up and say, we just feel like this player's not quite ready, is not the type of communication that head coach wants to hear. They want to hear player X has presented with this. Based on that information, our advice is this, and the implication of playing them in the way that you want to play them could be this. What are your thoughts? It's a very different approach to saying we just feel like they could do with a week off. You know, that's the sort of area of detail that communication I think people need to go into to be highly effective. Now, that requires the same amount of practice and reps that we put into our clinical skills and our reporting skills and our processes around all our technical work. But we just don't pay it the same service. Yeah.
That's really interesting. How much work have you done around some of that communication space there, Simon? And obviously in your areas, you've obviously maybe worked with some who have been really good at it, and maybe others not as much. Yeah, what are your experiences?
Yeah, once again, I'm kind of glad or, happy to hear Dan probably echo a couple of things that I feel that has become my approach to attacking this sort of area. And, once again, I haven't studied it to the extent that Dan has or anything like that. But one that stood out is meeting people where they are, like you mentioned about that, a coach liking a certain style is, and, your head of performance liking a certain style and your head of medical liking a certain style and this player liking a certain style, whereas this player likes another style, or different cultures, especially once again, this was more learning more recently with me, but, Crystal Palace, like, we had people from all over the world and different cultures like to be talked to in a different way. And that's not to generalize people of the same culture, then within that, obviously every individual likes to be taught to a different way. And so trying to, I guess, approach every communication situation, or trying to, approach communication from always from their side and seeking to understand before seeking to impart. I think a question that people will often ask is, how can I convince someone of this, or how can I explain this to someone or teach them this? Whereas I think it starts with, how do you understand what their point of view is, or how do you understand what their approach is, and then you can fill in the gaps. And then the other one, like Dan said about repetition, is trying to communicate all the time. And once again, I feel like if you're only talking to the coach when something's going poorly, or when you've got to deliver bad news, or you're only kind of talking to the wider MDT when you don't know what to do with a rehab or something like that, then straight away people's perception of you is going to be that you don't really know what you're doing, or if you're coming to talk to them, then it's bad news. And so, whereas if you're talking to people and trying to bring in the MDT all the time, or, keeping the coach updated, once again, at the level that they want to be, not just telling them all these random facts about players that they don't care about as long as they're available on the weekend, then you can start to develop that communication style with them and know the way that they like to be spoken to in a low stress environment. So when the stress is on and, you're having to potentially deliver bad news or go against or advise against a decision they want to make, the lines of communication there, the groundwork's already been done. So they're two things that, I've kind of, I suppose, incorporated and try and work on moving forward as much as I can. And I think I said, I guess, and I suppose, and I think about a million times in that sentence after hearing Dan tell us how weak that makes my answer sound. So there's another one that I'll start working on.
Now, some two very good points, and yeah, look, you could critique the way those words. We always, it's a constant evolving space to try to improve the way you talk, and then you listen to yourself, and you're like, oh no, it's a terrible thing sometimes to listen to yourself back on things like this or your podcast. So usually I just roll them out. But okay, yes, but some really great learnings there, and I guess how to apply our communication skills, and also so some great little practical tips. Now we touched, I guess, on that sort of rating scale, some around practical intellectual intelligence, and the learning space and communication skills. Just to touch on networking a little bit, and I think Dan had some really good tips around. Earlier, it's not just who it's, I guess, them having an idea on you. So it sort of comes back to you maybe being able to consistently apply good work over a period of time that builds that trust. Still, how do I go about creating those networks for me? I'm picturing a clinician in a few years out. I'm trying to build here, but I don't have a great network. Or Simon, I've just moved to the UK. I don't know heaps of people. I'll throw this one at you, Dan, first. Where do I start with this? How do I
Yeah.
start building that? How do I start growing mentors and people I can lean on?
Yeah, the first one is to look within your trusted network already, like lean into that, and anyone who can open the door within a connection, it's more powerful because there's an element of trust within it already. So if Simon was coming to the UK, and Chris Myers had worked with you, and he said, look, Simon's targeted some observations in S&C. Would you mind if he shadowed you at any point? Then, of course, I'm not going to ignore Chris, and I'm going to say one or two things. I'm going to say, I'd love to, mate, but my capacity is quite full at the moment. So I'd get him to reach out in the future, or I'm going to say, yes, absolutely, connect him with me. And that's the first thing, is that people jump straight to an individual and name drop the other way around. I know Chris, Dan, and I'd love to connect with you. And it's like, well, actually, if you, it's easier if you get somebody else to open the door for you. All right. And it's less expectant. So that's the first way. If you can lean into that, it's better. The next way is to be really purposeful and not expectant, right? So just like the conflict side of things that Simon talked about, never assuming, we shouldn't be assuming that anyone owes us anything, right, when it comes to networking. And so if we can anchor into purpose within a network connection, that's really powerful. So the way to do that is be patient, is to maybe quietly observe some of an individual's interactions on social media and interact with them and comment and provide some thought-provoking questions that might get you some dialogue, and then that's an easier DM than going cold and saying, can you answer this question for me? Would you do this or would you do that? Like, it's expectant, right? You know it is, but we've all been guilty of it. We're just quick to rush. There's no patience in it. So networking needs strategy. It needs to be thought out, and it needs respect. It needs respect that that person's time is valuable. And so a question that is anchored to something I've been talking about. So if somebody comes to me and says, I heard your talk on the webinar with the guys and it really resonated with me. Would you mind if I asked you some questions about communication in more detail? That's not an expectant message, right? If they said to me, based on your webinar that I listened into, I've got these questions. Bang, 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 bang. Or can you tell me where to go to learn about this? It's very expectant and transactional. And so, like, if somebody's paid for my time and then asked that question, that's different, right? But networking is an art, and it's generally an art around communication again. So those are some tips to start with. So it'd be much more relevant to be purposeful and respectful in your messages or your approaches.
Yeah, lovely. Simon, you moved to the UK and then obviously moved to the US, but I might just think about here. You've moved to the UK and you've landed obviously a great job at a professional sport organisation. How did you lean on your networks, or how did you go about that process?
Yeah, very similar to what Dan said. It started with people I did know, and obviously, there's no shortage of Australian physios that moved to the UK. I'm not some trailblazer having done that, and so there were people I knew or people who knew people I knew, and speaking to those, and then when I think once again, like Dan said, and like you mentioned, I've been on both sides of this now. I've moved to two different countries and had to reach out to people who don't necessarily know who I am, and then vice versa, having now worked in a couple of organizations that people might see on LinkedIn and think, oh, I want to talk to this guy. I've had some cold messages come my way as well, and I think it starts from reaching out to people with some sort of common ground, like Dan said, if you've seen them present on something and you genuinely found it interesting, and then just not being transactional with it, like Dan said. You're reaching out to people because you're genuinely interested in them and you want to get to know them and see what they're about, and maybe, and if they've got time to chat, they might be keen for it. And then from there, I guess it's been about, without being transactional or expectant, is when I'm having conversations with people who I have met either through networks I already have, or who have responded positively to a cold message and have a chat, is just being quite open and honest with my situation, what I'm interested in, what I like the idea of, what would excite me, you know, and kind of bringing it up to them as a way to share between us about, you know, what have you done in your career? What do you like? What are you thinking for the future? And, you know, vice versa for me. But then that's going to then be in their head of, oh, you know, you mentioned that you're interested in this. I actually know a guy that works at this club, or, you know, I had that experience here in the US. Like I'm lecturing at a university tomorrow, and I'm doing 3 this semester and hopefully more next semester. And that was just because, you know, one of the first people I met over here, who was the contact of one of the staff at Crystal Palace, and he's the head of performance at the rugby. So he's kind of helped me with that role, which, you know, made a bit more sense. But I was just mentioning how interested I am in education and moving forward and those sorts of things. And yeah, he just happened to know the one of the professors at Loyola University, and so he put us in touch. Whereas, you know, if I kept that secret, or not secret, sorry, if I didn't bring that up because I thought, oh, this guy's the head of performance at rugby, he's not in education, or, you know, I'm only going to ask him about things I think I can get from him rather than just, you know, sharing about myself and learning about himself, then that wouldn't have come up. So, yeah, I think it's got to be genuine connection. Most people are open to genuine connection, and whether they have time or not to foster it with you in that moment. But if it's transactional, it definitely, they're the LinkedIn messages that I tend to not or to avoid. Yeah.
Yep. Oh, well said. Well said. All right. Well, we're going to sort of bring it into the conclusion piece shortly. Of this chat. It's been really informative, some great learnings for us. We've spoken a fair bit about, I guess, almost like planning that career trajectory, sitting down and, you know, and maybe coming from a lens of a lesser experienced clinician, but a lot of the time it's clinicians, you can hit a bit of a stalemate and get a bit stuck, lost. So if I'm an experienced clinician and I'm finding that I'm just not too sure about what to do next, like, is there anything different there, Dan, that I need to do to stop and reevaluate? What do I do when I'm in this position?
Yeah, I think it's definitely good to look at the root causes of why you're thinking that way, because there's some level of discontent there. So why is that? Is it that you love your role, but you don't love the surroundings you operate within? You feel constrained there? That's one thing. Is it that you have lost the love for that type of work that you previously did love? So there's been a loss of advocacy for that role or that type of role, and therefore it might need a bit of pivot. Um, is it that you're stagnant and that you see other people who are peers developing into roles that you aspire to? What's the disconnect? Is it that you have a gap in the skills that they've gone and developed, or are you constrained by personal, whereas that person is not constrained. They are single. Like, it's really important to deeply analyze why you feel that before you take action, because the action then becomes really quite clinical, so to speak. Excuse the pun, because you know exactly what you need to do to take those steps forward and change the feeling that you have, because it'll largely be relatively emotional, something emotional that you're feeling there. So those are the first things, is to look deeply, and it's tough to just do that, right? And just think like that. So seek advice, seek confidential support. Yeah, I'm obviously a big advocate for mentorship. Now, there's coaching and there's mentorship. You know, executive coaching is more about questions and trying to guide you to your own answers, whereas mentorship is a little bit more like, well, you know, maybe you should do this. Have you thought about trying this? It's a little bit more direct and based on wisdom. So I'd actually seek somebody who's a little bit of a hierarchy to you, so that they can sort of maybe see some of the mistakes you're making. Because if you anchor into people who are peers, like, as in level, there may just be like, no, you're all good. You know, they don't see the glaringly obvious blind spots that somebody who had lived and the same doubt as you can see.
Mm. Yeah, nice.
Something, sorry, just quickly, Dan, if we've got a little bit of time,
Yeah.
something that came from that struck me a bit is talking about, like, seeing other people or peers, like getting roles that you think is cool and that kind
Yeah.
of. Yeah, how much of that, I guess, because I think we all suffer with it a little bit, but how much of your guidance is around sometimes people maybe pushing or getting discontent, maybe for, I don't want to say the wrong reasons, because we can all,
Mm.
can't tell someone what's right or wrong reasons for them, but like I said, chasing a badge or suddenly wanting a change because you think other people are doing better than you, or trying to get roles because you think that will kind of, I don't know, impress people, or doing it for
Mm.
those sorts of external reasons. Are there, do you have specific ways that you try and get people guided back to maybe more personal, longer term principles?
Yeah, it's all centered on those needs and wants, and asking yourself, like, what is your purpose? So I tell this story generally on every podcast I go on now because it's so left field. But if you understand your purpose, you can recognize what you're really comfortable with. My purpose was not to be a strength and conditioning coach. Really, if I dig deep, it was to help people. So I enjoyed helping people achieve their goals. It just so happens that I started to manufacture that in the world of S&C specifically. If it hadn't been that, it probably would have been rugby coaching or teaching or something like that, right? Now, I enjoy problem solving as well. So I enjoy helping people and I really love problem solving. I really love communicating and working with people. So we started a side business for for boarding sausage dogs, which sounds random, right? House boarding. We have a little business that helps cater for families who want to go away on holiday, and we look after their pets during that time because I'm utilizing my skills because I realize that my purpose is to help other people. I get a lot of gratification for that. Um, and I didn't realize that I could do so many more things when I was really clear about purpose. But previously, I felt some of that career jealousy, we could call it, where I was like, oh, those guys have got that job. And actually, maybe they were pursuing an identity, and that at some point that can catch up with you when you get to the point of no return, where you live a certain style of life that's either financially rewarding but no personal life, or is absent of the personal life you want. So, like being really honest with yourself and digging deep about what your reason is for doing what you want to do, or what your reason is for chasing something or feeling that jealousy, and being okay with it is a powerful thing for the next steps in your career. It is quite it's not astonishing at all because nobody really talks about this stuff, but it's quite alarming how many people aren't thinking about the the job serving the life they want to live, and it's that they have to serve the job more, like you're subservient to the job. So those things are all things that I challenge people to think about. Does that answer that? Yeah.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, I
Okay, cool.
Really good.
think you can answer very well. Obviously, yeah, I'd love to look, it's probably for another webinar and another sort of, but yeah,
Yeah.
maybe that's where your mentoring space comes in into breaking down,
Yeah.
and determining your values and obviously, yeah, I think sometimes, yeah, I've been lucky to sort of work through a process like that throughout my career at different stages, but it's certainly something most people I'd recommend doing to if you haven't got that
Yeah.
alignment piece, because yeah, I think it sort of starts to, as you say, maybe take away some of the looking at externally validation and looking at other people and feeling better within yourself. So yeah, some great pieces of advice there. I'm going to finish with a question to both of you, just uh, a quick fire little round I'd like to finish with. It's just if I'm a clinician out there listening today, and obviously we've heard lots of great things, but and I want to really just take my career to the next level or accelerate or use whatever term we need to, but what's one thing I should go away from now and delve into? I'll start with you, Dan.
Cool. Clinician who wants to take the next steps. I would really encourage them to think 2 or 3 steps ahead to determine what the next step is. Too often, individuals are thinking about the next step and it's too big a leap, and there's lots of other things that can be done first, right? And so that's the primary thing that I think people get wrong is that they jump to a big, hairy, audacious goal, as people call it in business, and they try and fit their next steps into that when actually there's some really important points. So if it's a high performance manager and you've never led a team and you've never dealt with conflict, like that's something that you need to deal with on top of your clinician skills, right? If it's that you want to step into a head of a department, then that might need some real good governance around systems and processes in terms of injury reporting and management that you might just be subservient to previously. So you might need to go through some of that in a little bit more detail. So yeah, I think it's about breaking down the steps into more steps, unfortunately,
Mm.
which is arduous because we're not patient people. But yeah, it certainly saves you hassle down the line or embarrassment, you know.
Yeah, or speed up the process in the long run. What about you, Simon?
I'd say, I mean, something to do right now is just trying to be the elite level clinician that you're trying to be in the role that you're currently in. You know, like Dan mentioned, like when I was working at Complete Physio, a private practice in central London, I wouldn't have thought that that would have any connection with, you know, the head of performance at the Astros when he was there. And, you know, so if you do the best in your role, obviously you're going to get growth out of that. Obviously it's going to be good for the right now. But, you know, like Dan said, the relationships you make for people that can actually vouch for you can count for much more than people you reach out to on LinkedIn. So you're going to get both sides to that. You're going to build relationships and people that trust you even when you move on from those roles, and it's going to help in your development. You don't need to wait till you're in the elite role or what you perceive to be an elite role to be an elite clinician. Just try and be as elite as you can, or you know, not not to use that word to be like, but yeah, be the best version you can right
Mm.
now in your role now.
I love that. Well, team, thank you very much. I think we've, and for those attending and tuning in, but this will obviously also come out to all our members in the coming days to watch on demand. But I think, yeah, Dan, there's some great resources to be had both within this and externally. I think we encourage anyone to delve deeper to contact Dan at Collaborate Sports. So really appreciate you coming on, Dan. To do
Cheers.
this and mate, so if someone wants to do that, we can just shoot over and yeah, fire away an
Nice.
email and get and connect. That's probably the best medium.
Yeah, I mean, I'm on Instagram as collaborate_sports. You can get some follows on there, lots of little freebies on that. But yeah, the website, collaboratesports.com. We do free webinars each month as well that are generally active learning in nature. And if you register for them with the potentially Aussie time zone difference here as well for people listening in, is that you get the recording for 7 days on a stream. So our next one is
Cool.
next week on change direction mechanics and ACL injury. So pretty pertinent. But yeah, there's always ways to get into the ecosystem, indirectly as well as directly.
I love that. Yeah, I think it's great to get your insights because I think it's not talked about too much. It's on the back of our career series, and obviously, yeah, you can't all just be learning. You got to be able to apply it to then, get to where you want to go and feel happy in your career. So we certainly appreciate your insights. And Simon, we had a few things lined up for you, question wise, around probably tapping into the practicality of the transfer and things like registrations and
Yeah.
um, developing CPD connections and networking in those different states. But you have actually written something for us, which is a really great informative piece. So we'll put that out in the coming days to really help people gain some access in, I guess, a bit of a how-to guide to do that. So that's hence why we didn't probably run out of time for those questions, but you've got that information we'll get out. So a big thanks again to both of you for joining us. I'll let you get back to your lives. But yeah, we'll be in touch and thanks very much.
Thank you guys. Appreciate the time.
Great.
Cheers,
Thanks,
guys.
Nick. Nice to meet you, Dan.
Stop.